Hey folks, Steve here, talking Juzo's Itami's Tampopo, and this film was like a cult sensation from the time it was released, and for many people at the time, it was their first real experience into Asia and into like cool indie, almost somewhat hipster Asian culture. The film was made in 1985, but it it oddly is more relevant today um, with like hipster culture and this whole idea of the hipsters, and they're always trying to make like a real particular like coffee that's the best coffee ever, and certainly the noodle shops that appear within Asia, but very much outside of Asia. If you go to Melbourne, you don't have to go far to find some sort of authentic, kitsch, nostalgic kind of Asian kind of noodle place, and this film kind of celebrates that, and it seems like watching it today that this culture is already thriving in the Western world as much as the Eastern world and the Japanese world, but it was very much a window into this kind of cool noodle shop kind of world, and I think that's what's so interesting about this film, and the way that essentially what it was doing, and this may seem odd, but like multiculturalism is certainly not a privilege of wealth, right? Not in Melbourne, and it was certainly not really anywhere in the world anymore. And in 1985, at the time of Tampopo was really declaring that. But up until that point, the whole idea of multiculturalism and really great eating and really great experience of culture and the finer things in life, like food, it was seen something of the more elite and the richer, right? And Tampopo is really about bringing that down to the person on the street. And what you get in this film, it's like a narrative, right, of three people who are really trying to set up the coolest, greatest, most brilliant noodle shop creating ramen soup ever. And oh my goodness, don't come to this film hungry. Terrific, right? So you kind of get that going on. But on the side of that, you have these vignettes, which are kind of little scenes that really don't mean anything to the central plot. And what you get in these vignettes is a whole range of different sorts of people experiencing food and experiencing the love of food. And what this film is saying is that good food, brings all sorts of people together, not just not just the snobbery elite. And with your whole the cooking shows and that whole tradition now of people in competition to cook the best whatever, this film has it going on big time. And there's a it's very competitive nature going on. And there are some gangsters in it. I mean, in a way, the film, it represents Japan. Like, it represents what we've come to know as the stereotype of Japan. Like, it's got, Yakuza gangsters. It's got a sex scene. It's got quirky, crazy Japanese humor. It's got quirky, crazy Japanese characters, and it's got unbelievably like salivating, mouth-watering food, which is just fantastic. It's also got those wonderful little, noodle shops and noodle places. So the film has everything. Now, this is the poster. This is the Western poster that you're looking at, which I thought was an interesting take. So it's got the Japanese writing of Tampopo, which is interesting. It's sort of saying, it's an authentic, Japanese, proper Japanese film. The Japanese writing and the Japanese language on the screen is very important to the whole idea of Asia on the screen and things like that. And it's called the first Japanese noodle western. And what does that even mean, the noodle western? There is a character in a cowboy hat. Do you need more in a film than a character in a cowboy hat to be defined as a western? That's just something to think about, ladies and gentlemen. But this poster has it going on. And one of the most enjoyable comedies in years. A high-spirited delight is one of the quotes on the poster. And the next poster to look at is the German poster. They went a bit more raunchy in their poster. The tagline reads, "Food and sex are basically the same." Well, I don't know about that. I'll let you be the judge of that. But there is a scene. And I mean, the thing about the film is it's saying that, this salivating thing about food, the way that people kind of lust over it, is sort of tantamount to kind of sex, and there is a scene where characters kind of merge the two together. But I'm kind of interested in the whole idea of promotion and promoting Asian films, and it's kind of outside of Asia. And the question is, does this poster and the previous poster I was just talking about actually represent? Do they give you a truthful representation of the film, or are they not truthful? I'll say it once and I'll say it again. I don't like publicity posters that lie to me. I want the film that's being promoted on the poster. Now, location. When we talk about location, we're often talking about landscape. When we're often talking about landscape, we're talking about hills and scenic outdoors, the great outdoors. And when we're saying location, we're also meaning setting, and we're meaning that what we've got here, which is a shot from the film in the noodle shop, that gives us a sense of Asia. That is an Asian experience. Being inside one of these shops gives us an Asian experience. And think about it, like when you go and eat, like in Melbourne, and you eat food, Asian food, it's not just about picking up your food and going and eating it, in the courtyard or outside the state library or something. It's actually about the experience of being in these places, which, is worth thinking about. And think about the way that the film really fetishizes this whole idea of this setting and this location. And I'm really interested in talking through location in this film and the way that it gives you so many different locations, but it kind of keeps coming back to the central location of the food shop. And there's a lot of scenes of preparing food and learning how to prepare food. Okay. How do we make sense of this film? Now, it's a comedy. I'll be very interested to know what you think of this film. It's a comedy, but do you find it funny? Or do you just find it ridiculous and not funny? I mean, it's absurd. The comedy is absurd. I think it works for what it's doing, but does it, even if you don't find it funny, do you think it works in giving me an idea of Japan and this sort of film? A lot of people like to speak to this film as a Western, and the reading I've given you for this week talks to the film as a Western. And it does have Western motifs and Western tropes, and if you've seen a number of classic Hollywood Westerns, like Rio Bravo, you will see there is a close similarity in narrative and characters and pastiche and things like that going on. So that's kind of interesting, the way that this film is taking known Western things and using them within its own narrative. And is that done in a way to get itself some publicity and promotion and interest outside of Asia, or is it actually doing something else? We can talk through that. What is the Asian cinema experience of this film? So how do we culturally and socially position it? How do we culturally, socially position this film? How do we make sense of it? Does it remind us of other films? Does it remind us of other ideas of Japan or Asia more generally that we see? How do we discuss within this film, right? Where and how do we watch this? So, I mean, obviously, we're going to watch it together in the cinema, but where would you recommend people watch this film? Like, is it a cinema experience where it has to be watched on the big screen? And there's a great scene that opens the film where you've got a character who's not sort of central to the story, but he sort of becomes kind of important to the story. And he talks directly to you, the audience, in the cinema. The whole idea is a film is saying this is a cinema film. It's a film to be watched in the cinema. And ironically, it's a film to be watched in the cinema, yet this gangster is telling you all to stop eating. Where do we place ourselves within it, as in within the film? Do we identify with this character? Do we just enjoy the ride that this film takes us on? And what should it do globally? So should this film play outside of Asia? Where should it play outside of Asia? The film did really well on the film festival circuit. Think about why this film would play so well at the film festival circuit. And I reckon, I don't know if there's any people in this course, any students who are identifying themselves as hipsters, but I reckon the hipster would be down for this film. I'm just putting it out there. If you know any hipsters and they've seen this film, ask them. I reckon they'd like Tampopo. I'm just putting it out there. Okay. Now, this is a quote. This is a quote from the reading that I've given you for this week. In Tampopo, directed by Itami Juzo, a celebration of connectedness and consumption joins a celebration of the cinema in the comedy of manners about Japanese society. Through parody and imaginative linkages, Itami attempts to gently illuminate underlying absurdities in contemporary Japanese social rituals. And think about that, the way that it's giving you particular social rituals. How do you eat noodles? How do you cook noodles? How do you sit in one of these places? And there's some great scenes. There's a great scene in like this Italian restaurant where the girl, these girls, it's like like girls from a finishing school are being told how to eat spaghetti, like Italian spaghetti, without making a noise. And then there's this character who's sort of making all of this kind of gross noise, and then it kind of unwinds, and the girls start impersonating the character. But it's all about rituals and eating, and the sort of the eating rituals that go along with what's actually happening in Japanese society and things like that. Like, when you go out to a Japanese restaurant and the meal comes and they give you a fork and you think, well, why are you giving me a fork? I'm in Japan now, even though you're in some sort of Japanese restaurant in Melbourne. I don't want a fork. I want chopsticks, because that's the ritual of eating Japanese food. Chopsticks, not a fork. Let me go back to the quote. The result is a surprisingly open-ended story which both satisfies and leaves viewers hungry for something a little more substantial. Now, it's the end of the quote that I have some questions about, and I'll put it out there for you, ladies and gentlemen. All right. Now, what's essentially being inferred here is, so it leaves you satisfied and leaves viewers hungry for something a little more substantial. Is this film substantial enough, or do you think it's light and slight? And I would be very interested to know what you make of that. If you do think the film was light and slight, it doesn't really work for you, tell us why. I for one would be very interested to know. And if you went with this film and loved it, again, I'd be very, very interested to know what you think of that, and whether the reading really captures the true essence of the film. And some things to consider in kind of closing is just the opening, right? Think about how the characters introduced. So you've got the gangster talking to the scene, and then you've got some very interesting couple of scenes really introducing all the characters. Think about how they introduced, how the setting is introduced, how the location is introduced, how the themes are introduced, how the tone of the film is introduced, and also the genres. What do we learn about them in the opening passages and sequences? How does this opening create a particular tone? Does the adapted film remain faithful to the opening of the source work? Because it was, reworking previous things, like a previous story that the director had done, which, is kind of interesting the way that he's sort of fleshing that up. Themes, list some details from the film that show a particular theme. These could be props or dialogues or music. Is this theme present in the literary source? And if so, how is this conveyed? Think what film can do that literature cannot. So just, I'm kind of interested in the whole idea of just how visual this film actually is, and setting, again, is something else to think about. And I think it would be good, just to start with this film, thinking of it, how is it a piece of cinema and what is it actually doing as a piece of cinema? Okay, I'll leave it there. So this is Tampopo. It's considered a classic. It was released by Criterion. So the Criterion Collection do la-di-da, fancy pants, DVD and Blu-ray releases where they do, like accompany it with a booklet, and they do beautiful kind of transfers of the films. And I've got it on Blu-ray for you. It's going to look great. And just think about why would audiences respond to this film so well, so positively? And that is definitely something that I would love to talk to you about with this film. So Tampopo, don't come hungry. And do come hungry, because it's going to give you a great appetite. And I think it's a wonderful film. I do find it funny. It's zany, it's crazy, it's everything we want, I think, from Japanese culture. All right, I'll leave it there. Bye for now.